The 911 call came in just before sunrise. The operator could barely make out the words through the frantic, broken sobs. "My wife, she's not breathing. I think she's gone. Please, hurry." When Officer Darren Barnes arrived at the Freeman residence, a modest white-paneled home nestled behind the town's only Baptist church, he expected something far less grim. A fainting spell, maybe a domestic argument that got out of hand. Not this. Inside, the house was still decorated with the remnants of joy. White rose petals on the floor, a half-melted wedding candle still flickering on the mantel. Framed photos of a newlywed couple, smiling as if blessed by heaven itself, sat proudly atop the piano. Then came the bedroom. Angela Freeman lay motionless on the edge of the bed, her neck marred by deep red bruises, lips tinged blue. A silk robe hung loosely off one shoulder, the delicate lace barely brushing her collarbone. Her body was cold, stiff, and kneeling beside her, his white shirt stained with blood, his hands trembling as they clutched a worn Bible, was her husband of just one day, Pastor Elijah Freeman. "She's with the Lord now," he whispered without looking up, voice hoarse and cracked. "She lied, and now she's gone." Officer Barnes hesitated. "Sir, did you hurt your wife?" Elijah slowly raised his eyes. The calm in them was more terrifying than rage. "I loved her," he said. "I truly did. But some lies, they kill the soul long before they touch the body." He laid the Bible gently across her chest, then stood and turned himself in. By noon, the news had spread across the sleepy town like wildfire. Pastor Elijah Freeman, God's redeemed son, beloved leader, and newlywed, had murdered his bride just 24 hours after saying, "I do." Just one day earlier, the town of Willow Creek had been wrapped in celebration. The church bell rang 12 times that Saturday afternoon as Pastor Elijah Freeman stood at the altar, hands folded, eyes glistening. At 45, he had weathered storms most men would drown in: years of drug addiction, the death of his first wife, and a battle with despair that nearly broke him. But here he was, dressed in a cream-colored linen suit, looking every bit like a man reborn. Angela Morris entered the church with a quiet kind of grace. Her ivory gown clung gently to her frame, her veil sheer enough to show the soft curve of her cheekbones and the tremble of her lips. At 29, she was younger, but not naive. She had seen her share of sorrow, nursing patients through death, comforting grieving families, carrying secrets that had followed her from Florida like a second shadow. But today wasn't about sorrow. It was about second chances. The pews were filled with townsfolk dressed in their Sunday best, smiling, clapping, some even wiping away tears. Elderly Miss Geneva hummed a hymn softly as Angela approached the altar, and Brother Wallace muttered a prayer of gratitude. There was something divine in the air, something sacred. For a moment, all was right. "I take you, Elijah," Angela said, her voice steady, "to be my husband, my partner, my home. I vow to honor, to protect, and to heal." Elijah took her hands, squeezing them tight, eyes locked onto hers. "And I vow," he replied, "to trust, to forgive, and to cherish you for all my days." The kiss that followed was tender, slow, and thunderous in its silence. The congregation erupted in applause, even those who had once doubted the whirlwind romance. Angela's sudden move to Willow Creek, her quiet demeanor, clapped with genuine joy. Afterward, at the church hall reception, the couple danced beneath fairy lights strung across the ceiling. Elijah's laughter echoed louder than the music. Angela's face glowed as she fed him a slice of lemon cake. There were speeches, hugs, glasses clinking with sweet tea. The townsfolk spoke of miracles, of grace, of love that heals all wounds. Elijah held her close that night as they stepped into their modest little home behind the church. He whispered in her hair, "I prayed for you, Angela, for years, and now you're here." She didn't speak for a moment, just pressed her head into his chest, her fingers gripping the back of his shirt. And then softly, "Don't let me go." Elijah kissed her forehead. Never. The lights dimmed. The door closed behind them, and the town of Willow Creek slept peacefully, unaware that by morning their miracle would become a nightmare. The evening settled in with the stillness only small-town nights can offer. Crickets hummed outside the window, and a soft breeze teased the curtains. Inside the newlywed home, the warmth of the wedding still lingered. The bed had been turned down. The faint smell of lemon cake and roses clung to the sheets. Elijah stood in the bathroom, shirtless, staring at himself in the mirror. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. For the first time in years, he felt whole, redeemed not just in the eyes of God, but in the arms of a woman who had chosen him without fear or pity. He ran his fingers over the cross tattoo just above his heart, a relic from his years in darkness, then turned the faucet on. In the bedroom, Angela lit a candle on a nightstand. The soft glow lit her face, catching the nervous flicker in her eyes. She sat at the edge of the bed, smoothing the satin hem of her nightgown again and again. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced a smile when Elijah entered. "You nervous?" he teased gently. "A little," she admitted. He walked over and cupped her chin. "It's just us now," he whispered. "No more running. No more fear. You're safe." She leaned into his touch and closed her eyes. "I want to believe that." Their kiss was slow, full of reverence. As they lay down together, the room filled with the hush of intimacy, the delicate language spoken by skin and breath and trust. Elijah's heart swelled as he traced her face, murmuring prayers between each caress. But somewhere in the night, after the laughter quieted and the sheets tangled around their legs, he rose to open a bottle of wine. With a soft pop, the cork flew out and grazed his hand. He flinched. A shard of glass had cut his palm. Not deep, but enough to bleed. Angela's face changed. She rushed to him. "Let me get something. Sit down. Let me see it." He watched her, puzzled by the panic in her voice. "It's okay, just a scratch," he said, chuckling. "I'm not made of glass, babe." "No, you need to clean it." Immediately. Her urgency was strange, frantic. She grabbed the hydrogen peroxide and a gauze pad, pressing them into his hand a little too hard. Elijah studied her. "Angela, what's wrong?" She paused, just for a beat, and then smiled, too wide, too forced. "I'm just being a nurse, that's all." But something about her voice, about the way she avoided his eyes, sent a prickle of unease crawling up Elijah's spine. He let her finish wrapping the wound, but the warmth in the room had cooled. Later that night, as she slept curled against him, he stared at the ceiling. The flickering candlelight danced across the room, but it couldn't burn away the chill that had crept into his bones. He remembered the pressure of her hands, the flash of fear in her eyes, the way she'd whispered, "Don't let me go," like a confession. Sleep never came for Elijah that night, and though he didn't know it yet, that little cut on his hand would be the beginning of the unraveling. The blood that bound them in love would soon bear the weight of betrayal. And by sunrise, the man who had vowed to cherish her forever would start to question if he ever really knew her at all. By morning, Elijah was a different man. He stood at the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the trail of crimson left behind on the white cloth Angela had used to wrap his hand. The cut had stopped bleeding, but the questions hadn't. Her reaction the night before played over in his mind like a film he couldn't pause. Why had she panicked over a minor injury? Why did her voice tremble when she said, "You need to clean it immediately"? Something was wrong, and whatever it was, it lived in her silence. After breakfast, eggs barely touched, coffee gone cold, Angela kissed his cheek, told him she was heading to the grocery store, and walked out the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The moment it closed behind her, Elijah grabbed his truck keys and headed to the clinic. Dr. Rowland, an old friend from Elijah's pre-pulpit days, was surprised to see him. "Elijah Freeman in my office? Thought you had better ways to spend your honeymoon," he joked. Elijah didn't smile. "I need a blood panel. Full. No delays." Rowland studied him for a moment. "Everything okay? Just for peace of mind." Within 15 minutes, they had drawn blood. Elijah left without saying much more. He went home, cleaned up the kitchen, and waited. Angela returned just after noon, her arms full of groceries and flowers. She kissed him on the lips and placed sunflowers on the table. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Elijah replied. "Just tired." That night they had dinner, talked about planting tomatoes in the spring, watched an old gospel concert on DVD. Angela leaned against his shoulder, and Elijah led her. But his heart beat differently now, measured, cautious, listening. The next day, the phone call came. "Elijah," it was Dr. Rowland, voice low, serious. "I need you to come in. Immediately." "Why?" "Just tell me. I'd rather do this face to face." "Tell me, Rowland." A long pause. "Elijah, your blood test came back positive for HIV." The room swayed. Elijah sat down slowly, as if gravity had grown heavier. "That can't be right," he whispered. "I've been tested before. I'm clean. I've been clean for years. There's no mistake." Silence. Deafening. Elijah hung up without another word. The world around him disappeared. The laughter from the night before. The warmth in her touch. The vows. The prayers. All of it went mute, swallowed by a roaring in his ears. He stood and walked to the bathroom mirror, stared at himself the way he had on his wedding night. But this time, his reflection didn't look like a man reborn. It looked like a man betrayed. Angela found him sitting on the porch steps where she returned home. The look on his face froze her in place. Elijah, he didn't look at her, didn't blink. "You got something you want to tell me, Angela?" She dropped the grocery bag, the sound of shattering glass echoing on the concrete. "Elijah, don't lie," he said, his voice steel. "Not now." Tears welled in her eyes. Her lips parted, but no words came. "You knew," he said coldly. "You knew what was in your blood, and you let me love you anyway." Angela dropped to her knees. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't even know for sure. Please, Elijah." But he had already stood up, walked past her, walked straight into the house. That night, for the first time in years, Elijah didn't pray. He just sat in the dark and listened to the clock ticking, to the ache building in his chest, and to the quiet voice inside him that whispered, "She killed something in you." The next morning, the sun rose, but Elijah didn't. He sat in the living room armchair, still wearing the same shirt from the night before, the collar wrinkled and damp with sweat. His Bible lay untouched on the coffee table. Across from him, Angela sat on the edge of the couch, hands trembling in her lap, lips pressed into a line so thin it seemed like she had none at all. "I didn't know for sure," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying all night. "I swear to God, Elijah, I didn't know until a few weeks ago." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw a stranger. "You swear to God," he echoed bitterly. "Angela, I preach God. Don't invoke his name like it's perfume to cover up the stench of betrayal." She flinched. "I thought I could outrun it." Elijah rose to his feet slowly, his body stiff like a man twice his age. "Outrun what?" Angela hesitated, then exhaled, one long, broken breath. "It was back in Florida. One of my patients, he was dying and lonely. We crossed a line. I didn't mean to. It wasn't planned. I was weak. He was kind. And then I got sick. I didn't get tested right away. I just left everything behind. Came here for a new start." A new start. Elijah snapped. So you thought you could package up your sin and hand it to me in a tuxedo? What did you think would happen? That I'd never find out? That you just keep living a lie in God's house? I thought maybe it wouldn't matter, she choked out. Maybe love could fix it. He stared at her in silence. His pulse throbbed in his ears. Love. That word again. She said it like a shield, but it only cut deeper. Elijah turned away and stormed into the office. Pulled open the drawer. Dug into files, folders, papers he'd never thought to question. Until he found it. A transfer record from her old hospital. A name. St. Jude Memorial. A note. Suspended for breach of professional ethics. And beneath it, a line written in cold, bureaucratic ink. Allegation of inappropriate contact with terminal patient. Exposure to blood-borne illness under investigation. He dropped the file like it burned his hands. Angela had followed him in, eyes wild with desperation. I was scared, she said. I was afraid if you knew, you'd turn away like everyone else. I needed something good, and you were light. Elijah turned, trembling, his voice a low, boiling growl. I was your pastor, your husband, not your redemption story. Angela stepped forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, he said flatly. You hurt me worse than anything in my past ever did. Even when I was lost, I never took someone else's life and smiled through it. I thought I had more time. You had one night, Angela. One night. That's all I ever got from you that wasn't a lie. Silence fell heavy between them. Angela reached for him. Elijah, please. I love you. But he stepped back, his face hardening into something she'd never seen before. No, he said. You love the idea of being forgiven. That's not the same thing. She sobbed, collapsing onto the floor. Elijah walked away, back to the living room, back to the chair. He sat down and closed his eyes, his hand drifting to the small wound on his palm. It throbbed again, like a reminder that something was working its way inside. In the silence, he imagined it. HIV, multiplying in his blood, traveling through his veins like whispered lies. The sickness wasn't just in his body now. It was in his spirit, his future, his name. That night, Angela slept on the couch. Elijah didn't sleep at all, and in the early hours, when a moon hung low and judgment filled the air like smoke, he opened his Bible, not to pray, but to search. Not for comfort, but for justification. And what he found wasn't peace. It was fire. The next day passed like a storm cloud dragging its weight across the sky, slow, ominous, and suffocating. Angela barely spoke. She cleaned the dishes, folded the laundry, tried to carry on as if their world hadn't cracked in half. Elijah, meanwhile, drifted through the house like a ghost, silent and hollow-eyed, as though something inside him had already died. That evening, as the sun bled orange across the windows, Elijah lit a single candle on the kitchen table and opened his Bible again. But he didn't read it like he used to, not with hope or reflection. He scanned the pages like a man hunting for an answer, a loophole, a reason, something to make what he felt righteous. Be sure your sin will find you out, he read aloud, voice flat. The wages of sin is death. He closed the book. The knife block gleamed under the kitchen light, but he didn't touch it. No, he wasn't going to use a blade. That would be too deliberate, too easy to blame. Instead, he walked upstairs. Angela was already in bed, facing away from the door, her breathing slow and steady. She always curled into herself when she was scared, like a child waiting for the storm to pass. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched her. You remember what you told me that night at the altar? He asked quietly. Angela stirred, her voice groggy. What? You said you vowed to heal. She turned to look at him, eyes puffy. I meant it. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. Funny thing about vows. They mean something when you keep them. Angela sat up, uneasy. Elijah, I know you're angry, but we can. No, he said. We can't. There was no warning, no screams, no struggle. Just a man who placed his hands gently around his wife's neck. The same hands he'd used to hold communion cups and bless babies and cradle her face on their wedding night. Angela's eyes widened. Her mouth opened in horror, but no sound escaped. Her nails clawed at his wrists, desperate, pleading, but he held firm. Not out of rage, but resolve. He whispered into her ear as the life drained from her body. You took my future from me. Now I'm taking yours. When it was over, he laid her back on the pillow as if tucking her in for sleep. He smoothed her hair away from her face, kissed her forehead, and folded her hands over her chest. Then he retrieved his Bible from the table downstairs, opened it to Psalms, and returned to the bedroom. He sat beside her lifeless body and began to read aloud. Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. He didn't notice the tears falling until they hit the page. By the time the sun rose, Elijah was still sitting there, motionless, numb. The room smelled of sweat, of death, of the last breath of something wholly now gone. At exactly 6:43 a.m., he reached for the phone and dialed 911. My wife, he said calmly. She's dead. Sir, did something happen? Is she breathing? No, he said. Not anymore. Can you tell me what happened? Elijah looked down at her, then at the Bible in his lap. His voice was almost gentle. She lied, he said, and now she's with the Lord. When the officers arrived, they found him still seated beside her, hands resting on the good book, his shirt stained with dry blood. He didn't resist, didn't speak until they asked again if he'd hurt her. He looked up, eyes dry, voice steady. I loved her, he said, but some lies kill the soul long before they touch the body. And with that, he stood, turned himself over, and walked out the door, leaving behind the house that had held both his salvation and his damnation. Elijah Freeman was no longer the pastor of Willow Creek. He was now the man who murdered his bride, and the town that once saw him as a symbol of redemption would never look at him the same again. The image of Pastor Elijah Freeman being led out of his house in handcuffs was something the town of Willow Creek would never forget. He didn't look like a murderer. He didn't thrash or yell. He didn't cry. He walked out slowly, solemnly, as if each step were part of a funeral procession. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, locked on nothing and everything, as the morning sun cast long shadows down. Maple Street, neighbors peeked through blinds and screen doors, hands over mouths, hearts pounding. Mrs. Geneva Richardson clutched her Bible tighter than she ever had in church. Across the street, Mr. Wallace dropped his coffee mug, the shatter echoing down the driveway. And children, still in pajamas, asked questions their parents didn't know how to answer. Inside the police cruiser, Elijah sat in silence. Officer Barnes drove without saying a word. He'd known Elijah for years, had prayed with him after his first wife died, had shaken his hand at countless Sunday services. And now, he couldn't even look in a rearview mirror. At the station, Elijah declined an attorney, declined a phone call, declined water, food, comfort. I have nothing else to say, he told Detective Holman. She's gone. The rest is between me and God. But the law demanded answers. An autopsy confirmed the cause of death, manual strangulation. No drugs, no alcohol in her system, just bruises on her neck, her arms, her wrists, and silence forever stamped into her lungs. The community reeled. Churches across the county held emergency vigils. Some mourned Angela. Others defended Elijah. Some whispered he had snapped from grief. Others claimed he had every right to be angry. But there were those who didn't whisper. I don't blame him, one man told the local reporter. You give your life to someone, and they infect you with HIV? That ain't just betrayal. That's a death sentence. She should have told him. Another muttered outside the courthouse. But he took a vow before God, and then he played God. Tension rippled through Willow Creek like lightning under the skin. News stations camped outside the courthouse. Camera flashes lit up the sidewalk like paparazzi at a movie premiere. But this wasn't a show. This was a tragedy unraveling in real time. In jail, Elijah refused visits. The church sent a representative, Deacon Charles Mathis, to offer prayer and counsel. Elijah wouldn't even open his eyes during the prayer. She wasn't a monster, Charles pleaded. She was just afraid. She made me unclean, Elijah murmured. She poisoned the one thing I had left, my faith. And in that moment, Charles realized what the town would soon accept. Elijah hadn't killed Angela out of rage. He had done it out of something worse, conviction. A week later, Angela's funeral was held at a church 30 miles away. Her family flew in from Florida, eyes dark with grief and disbelief. Her mother couldn't stop shaking as she clutched the last photo of her daughter in her wedding dress, smiling, radiant, unaware that she was standing on the edge of her own obituary. No one from Willow Creek attended the funeral, not out of disrespect, but because no one knew where they stood anymore. Was Angela a victim? Was Elijah a murderer or a man broken beyond repair? Was this about justice or judgment? In the following Sundays, Elijah's church remained closed. A single bouquet of white lilies was placed on the front steps by an anonymous hand. A note was tucked between the stems. We all fall short, but some of us never get back up. By the end of that month, Willow Creek wasn't just divided. It was changed. Forever. The man who once stood at the pulpit with words of hope had now fallen silent. And the woman who came seeking love had left behind only questions. But one truth echoed louder than any sermon ever had. Even the house of God, secrets have a way of finding their voice. And sometimes they scream loud enough to kill. The trial of Pastor Elijah Freeman began 6 weeks later in the Lowndes County Courthouse. And by then, Willow Creek had split into 3 kinds of people. Those who still believed in him, those who wanted him buried under the prison, and those who didn't know what to believe anymore. The courtroom was standing room only. Locals lined up before sunrise, wrapped in coats and scarves, whispering their opinions in hushed tones. Outside, satellite news trucks crowded the sidewalks. Inside, the wooden pews creaked beneath the weight of tension, grief, and contradiction. Elijah walked in wearing a simple gray suit. His hair was a little longer, his eyes sunken, but his posture was still straight, unbroken. He held the Bible in one hand and nodded politely at the judge, as if stepping into a Sunday sermon instead of a murder trial. The prosecution wasted no time painting the picture. A man scorned, a husband humiliated, a preacher who let wrath take the place of reason. They displayed the autopsy photos, the bruising on Angela's throat, the slight scratch on Elijah's hand, barely visible, but symbolic of the spark that ignited a fatal fire. Mr. Freeman claims to be a man of God, the prosecutor said, pacing before the jury. But what God commands a man to kill his wife in her sleep? Not justice, not righteousness, not faith. This was personal. This was revenge. Elijah's defense attorney, Marcus Levin, a sharp but measured man from Jackson, offered a different angle. Yes, Elijah killed his wife, he admitted, but he was a man driven to the edge by betrayal, by fear, by the irreversible reality that his life was permanently altered by someone he trusted with his soul. It does not excuse his actions, but it explains them. And in this court, understanding motive is everything. The most anticipated moment came when Elijah took the stand. The room fell silent as he placed his right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then he looked out at the jury, 6 men, 6 women, and began to speak. I was a broken man when Angela found me, he said. I had climbed out of the pit, years of drugs, lost, shame, and I had started preaching not because I was better than anyone, but because I knew what the bottom looked like, and I wanted to show others how to climb out. He paused, breathing through his nose, steady. I loved Angela. God, I loved her. When she walked down that aisle, I thought all the pain in my life finally made sense, that everything had led me to her. His voice cracked just once, but she knew. She knew she might have been sick, and she didn't tell me. Not before the vows, not before the ring, not before we shared the most intimate parts of ourselves. And when I found out, when the doctor said I was HIV positive, I didn't feel angry. Not at first. He looked down. I felt violated, in a way no sermon could ever fix. It felt like death had moved in under my roof, wrapped in lace and wedding perfume. There were no tears, just a hollow weight behind every word. I didn't plan to kill her. I swear I didn't. But that night, I looked at her and I saw the end of everything I believed in. And I lost myself. He folded his hands. I'm not asking you to forgive me. That's God's job. I'm asking you to understand that I didn't act out of hatred. I acted out of devastation. Angela's mother was the next to take the stand. A thin, older woman in a navy dress. She walked slowly, gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She wasn't perfect, she said through trembling lips. But she was kind, and she was scared. Scared no one would love her once they knew. She turned to Elijah, eyes glassy with fury and grief. You could have walked away. You didn't have to kill her. Elijah closed his eyes, not in defiance, but as if the words themselves pierced something sacred inside him. Closing arguments came with the gravity of a final breath. The prosecution showed the jury Angela's wedding photo again, the same one they had shown at the start. She stood smiling in her dress, unaware of what the next day would bring. She believed in him, the prosecutor said softly, and he turned her belief into a death sentence. Marcus Levin, for the defense, stood before the jury and said only this. Elijah Freeman has already been sentenced to a lifetime of living with what he's done. That's more than punishment. That's purgatory. The jury deliberated for 13 hours. When they returned, the courtroom rose. Elijah remained seated. On the charge of second-degree murder, the foreman said, "We find the defendant guilty." Gasps rippled through the room. Elijah didn't flinch. He only nodded once, as if he had been expecting that word his entire life. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25. Before being led away, Elijah turned to the gallery, his voice soft but clear. "I forgive her," he said, "but I'll never forgive what she did to my faith." And just like that, the pastor of Willow Creek disappeared behind steel doors, leaving behind a story that no sermon could make right. The gavel struck like thunder, and just like that, it was over. Elijah Freeman, once the voice of hope in Willow Creek, the man who spoke of redemption from behind the pulpit, was now just another inmate with a DOC number and a criminal record. He didn't cry, didn't curse, didn't plead. As the bailiff took his Bible and led him away, he walked with the same quiet dignity that once drew crowds to church pews. But outside those courtroom walls, nothing was quiet anymore. The town was broken, split down the center like old wood under pressure. Some said Angela got what she deserved. Others lit candles for her outside the old church doors, whispering her name as though trying to forgive her in death for what she never confessed in life. The Freeman house stood empty now. The front porch swing, once creaking gently in the Mississippi breeze, swayed stiffly in the silence. Weeds began to creep up the walkway, like time reclaiming a place it never meant to bless. Elijah's church never reopened. The congregation drifted. Some found other places to worship. Others gave up church altogether. The choir disbanded. The organ gathered dust. And the Sunday sermons that once brought light into people's lives were replaced with long, uncomfortable silences. A few weeks after the trial, someone pinned a note to the church door, scrawled in shaky handwriting. He was supposed to save us, not show us how to fall. Angela's headstone now rests in a modest cemetery plot outside Jackson. There are fresh flowers every month, always lilies, always white. No one ever sees who leaves them. And Elijah? He sits in a prison cell far from home. He doesn't preach anymore, doesn't teach, doesn't speak unless spoken to. But every night before lights out, he opens his Bible and reads the same verse. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light. And though no one hears it, he always closes it with the same 3 words. Lord, forgive me. Years passed, but the story of Pastor Elijah Freeman never truly faded. In quiet corners of Mississippi, folks still whispered his name at barbershops, in church parking lots, during potluck dinners where grief and gossip shared the same spoon. Some remembered his sermons. Others remembered his silence. There was no closure in Willow Creek, only fragments. Angela's story became a cautionary tale whispered to daughters. Don't keep secrets, baby. They can turn saints into sinners. Elijah's story became a riddle for the faithful. How does a man preach love on Saturday and kill on Sunday? But time is strange in places like Willow Creek. It doesn't heal. It hardens. The church building was eventually sold. A thrift shop moved in, and beneath racks of old dresses and books no one read, a faded cross still hung over the door, crooked, untouched. Some said it was bad luck to take it down. One summer, a young seminary student visited the town, researching fallen pastors for a thesis. He asked questions, took notes, and eventually tracked down Elijah. Then 60, grayer, leaner, but with that same stillness in his eyes. You ever regret it? The student asked during a prison interview. Elijah looked at him for a long time. I regret loving her with blind faith, he finally said, but not loving her. That part was real. But you killed her, the student whispered. Yes, Elijah said, because I couldn't forgive what she took from me. The student hesitated. Your health. Elijah shook his head. My trust in grace. That interview never made it into the thesis. It was too raw, too human, too far from the black and white the seminary had taught him. On the 20th anniversary of Angela's death, someone carved a message into the base of her gravestone. I was more than my secret. And someone else, perhaps the same hand, perhaps another, etched a reply at the bottom. And I was more than my failure. In the end, there were no heroes, no saints, just people, flawed, fragile, desperate to be seen and loved. Elijah Freeman will die behind bars. Angela Morris died with a secret in her blood. But in the space between them, a truth lingered. Even the faithful can fall, and even love, when wrapped in silence, can kill.